Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Tea Time tutorial. My name is Brian Robinson and I'm with Code Contemporary, a developer education company that I started a few months back, doing office hours every week as well as online courses. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. We're trying some new stuff this week. I've rebranded, as you can kind of see around. Hopefully this is all coming through on YouTube pretty good. And so we are now tea time tutorials instead of my usual office hours. And that's because really I was drinking tea with every single episode. And so I wanted to kind of play into that a little bit, as well as letting you know that this is a tutorial time, but it's also a big question and answer time too. And so I've actually embedded, let's see over here, the actual live chat. So I would actually really appreciate it if we could try that out a little bit today. So if you're watching, go ahead and post a comment over there so I can kind of see it in action. From a technology standpoint, it's supposed to be working. We'll see. And so I do take questions, so make sure that if you do have any questions about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, development in general, professional development in general, that you post them over in the chat. They will show up on stream, and I will make sure to do my best to answer them either through our tutorial today, but also at the end if we need to as well. I wanted to kind of do a shout out real fast. I'm drinking a tea called Bella Luna Blue. It's from Adagio Teas. It is delicious. It's got some blueberry going on. And my favorite part about it, well, other than the fact that I get to have it in my son's mug, is that it's actually a blue tea. It turns the tea water blue. And I think that's just a really cool little fancy bit. So my first tea time tutorial, I wanted it to be a fancier tea. And here we are with a fancier tea. So today, we're going to be talking about a little bit of animations in CSS. So we're going to be doing the basics, right? Which is the CSS transition. And now a CSS transition is transitioning from one state in CSS to another state. So this isn't going to be super fancy. It's going to be super basic, get you started, get you the building blocks to work through. And then hopefully in a future tutorial, we'll talk about doing this in a bigger way. So as usual, I do have a code pen that is going to be utilized for this. I'll put the link in the description for after. But as you can see, we've got two different examples that we're going to be working with here. We're going to do a link, a button link style that's going to have a nice smooth transition, and we'll play with a little bit of timing on that. And then we're going to play with this idea that was actually posted in the Code Contemporary Slack channel, which is a great resource for beginning developers. They were talking about a cool code pen they found doing some animations, and so I kind of took that as a basis for the second piece of the tutorial today. It's not going to be as fancy as the link that they had found, which I'll also post in the description later on, but it will give you the first bits to get you closer to that. So we're going to dive in, and we're going to do the very first tutorial, which is going to be, let me get this into a better view for y'all, which is going to be styling our anchor up here to have a hover state that once hovered over gives the user a little indication that something is interactive with it. So let's go into our CSS. You can see I already have some CSS written. This is just kind of standard boilerplate for doing a button style link. So we changed it from display block or display inline to display inline block, add some padding to make that work a little bit better in terms of spacing. I put some margins just so we've got some clear space to work with. Get rid of the text decoration, make the background color, make the color of the text, and then add a little border radius just for a little extra style. So that's all I've done for this button, is I have styled it to look like a button. So we want to give this a hover state of some sort, right? So we want to go ahead and define our hover state, and then we will transition from our non-hover state into our hover state. So to do that, I'm going to use the CSS pseudo class hover. So dot button being the class I've attached this to, colon hover. And then inside of our declaration, we're just going to go ahead and darken the background color just for a start. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to change my background color from that tomato to a dark red. And now you can do this with any color value. You can do it with RGB, HSL, you could do hexadecimal values. This transitional state is going to work for all of them. So when we come over to our button style, over in the browser, you can see directly on hover, it pops over to that state. It pops over to the dark red color style on the button. That's a little jarring. It at least gives our user some indication that something's going on here, but we can make this much less jarring by adding a simple transition to this style change. So the easiest way to do this is to just use the transition property in CSS, and it's going to take, it's a shorthand for a few different things. For the property that you're looking to transition, the timing of it, and it can take an easing function for the way it's going to actually run through it. So in this case, I want to transition all, so I'm not going to specify any property, but I'm going to specify time, and it can take milliseconds or seconds. I like to do it in decimals of seconds, so I'm going to specify, just so we can see it, 1 second for our transition. I'm just going to go ahead and save that in, and when we come over and hover, you can see it's a very slow transition into that state. And then it also automatically does the reverse of that as well. So when I hover off, it does 1 second to go back to that tomato coloring. That's a little bit slow, so I'm going to go ahead and define it at, I like about a 0.3 second transition for my button style. And then I'm also going to define a keyword easing function. So CSS comes with a whole bunch of built-in easing functions. The most useful of which that I find, if you're just going to use an out-of-the-box transition, is the ease out function. And what this does is it actually front loads the speed. So within the first millisecond, it's actually going to be the fastest it's going to be, and then it eases to the output, right? So it starts as fast as it can go, and then it's going to ease. So it's kind of like one of these, it goes whoosh, and then it slows into it. So ease out, it gives the user an immediate satisfaction that something's happening, and then it also kind of has a little bit of a gentler end. So if we come over here, we can see that it fades in and out, and it starts quickly, and then it kind of slows down at the end. It's a little bit hard to see with color changes. We'll play around with it a little bit more when we do these promos down here. But we can also transition any property that we want throughout the course of this transition. Since I haven't specified a property, any property that changes that is transitionable will work to transition in this hover state. So I can actually come in here and I could say we want the color of the text to also change, and we'll change that, I don't know, we're going to make this awful looking. We're going to make it lime green, which is another excellent CSS color. So when I hover over, in 0.3 seconds, it's going to transition both the background color and the font color of this button. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. And just so we can see it a little bit better, we'll make it longer again. We'll make it 2 seconds. This is going to be awful looking, I can already tell you. And we'll come in here, hover over, and you can see it changes through from white to lime green and from tomato to dark red. So you can also do something like a text shadow as well. So we can add a text shadow, and we'll do it a pretty big shadow. We'll do 6 pixel, 6 pixel, 10 pixel, and we'll make it black. So now when I hover, it's applying that drop shadow to our text at the same time. So this all doesn't feel quite right. And the nice thing about transitions is that we can transition different properties at different speeds. So in this simple example, I'm going to change our transition to call out specifically the property that is just the background color. So background color space 2 seconds space ease out, and that's going to define one singular transition on this element. So now when we hover, everything else pops. You see how that drop shadow and the color just pop over, and then the background eases in. So we can do that, and this can actually be comma separated, and each of these can take a different type of value. So we'll put a comma. I like to add line breaks in here just to keep my code a little bit cleaner. And then I can also say I want my color, I always put a colon in there. I always want that to be the case. But my color is going to take 5 seconds, and we'll have that ease out as well. So if we save that in, we can see that our background color changes quicker, our color changes a little slower, And then we can also do the same thing on our text shadow and make that one, see, added a colon there too. Make that 0.5 seconds ease out as well. So now each of those properties is transitioning at a different pace. Okay, so I don't like how slow any of that is, so we're going to go ahead and speed it up, but I also want to I will talk about delays in a second. So let's go ahead and bring all these back down. We'll make the background color 0.5, we'll make the color transition, I'll make that one be pretty quick, and text shadow, we'll leave at 0.5. And let's see what that looks like. It's a little janky, but that color combination was never going to be great. So yeah, that is the very, very basics of doing a CSS transition. Now there are a lot of caveats to how this works, right? If it's a numeric value, it can be transitioned overall. So colors at the end of the day are numeric values, so that's why they're able to be transitioned. Positioning is able to be transitioned, although that has some performance issues we'll talk about in a second. And then obviously text shadow has a series of numbers which can be transitioned. Opacity can be transitioned. Things like the display property cannot, because those are just a switch over, and that would cause a dramatic repaint in the browser. So none of the browser manufacturers sign on to that sort of idea. So you can only transition things that can be fluidly transitioned from one value to another. Hope all that makes sense. If you have any questions, like I said, be sure to put them over in the chat box, and I'll get to them when I can. But without that, we're going to go ahead and transition ourselves into doing a little bit more of an advanced transition. So you can see down below, after we've got our button styled link here, we have two promo spots, and there is a little bit of boilerplate CSS written for them. We have a promo that has a background image. The background image is set to cover. It has a minimum height just so we can see things a little bit better. The display flex on that is to allow for the window pane effect here to be full height. And then our promo content has a little bit of margin around it. You can see that reflected here. It's got a background color, which is an RGBA value, which allows me to set a white transparency behind it. It's got a little bit of padding for cleanliness, and then I'm using grid to go ahead and lay my promos out flush against the left and right hand side with a little bit of gap in between. That's all that I've done so far. So now what we want to do is I want to actually move our content out of the pane, and I want it to transition to come into the pane. So on hover, I'm going to want this to move over from being invisible off to the side into view inside of our promo. This isn't necessarily the best usability. Like obviously a user has to know to hover to be able to get to it, but it illustrates a few of the points that we're going to be making. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to just start from scratch up here. So ignore all that. Just know that if I were writing this in reality, I would actually have all these inside of their own declarations and not be declaring them multiple times. So to begin with, I need to go ahead and move this off canvas. Hold on one second for me. Let's see. So to do that, what I'm going to end up doing is adding the transform property to our promo content. Our promo content contains the headline, the description, as well as that kind of white window pane effect. So on promo content, I'm going to specify, let's see, transform, and I'm going to use translate X, and that's translating it left to right across the X axis. So translate X, and we're going to translate that 100% over. And you can see it's still kind of peeking in here, right? And that's because I have those margins being set. So what I actually end up needing to do is use a calc function. If you're not familiar with calc functions, they're great for taking dynamic values and pairing them with static values. So we've got 100%, and I know that my paddings are 1 rem total, 0.5 left, 0.5 right, and that's going to move it completely off canvas. Although you can see it's still there, and we actually have a horizontal scroll happening now. So I've moved it outside, and now what I want to do is I want it to disappear. Now I could have this kind of go visibility hidden, I could have it be display none, but those aren't transitionable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide it by on each of my promos. I'm going to add overflow hidden, right? So overflow hidden, And that means that if I've moved something outside of its window, outside of its containing element, that it will now be hidden. So this is all dependent on the height and width of promo, and promo content is outside of that width, and so it's not allowed to be seen. It's hidden. So now we can do our first transitional state, and that's going to be just to slide these into view on hover. So promo __ content, hover, just like we did on the button, and I'm going to specify that my transform translate x is going to go back to 0, to the 0 point, to where it originated from. So I hover, I get nothing because I've probably typoed something somewhere. All right, time for a debug. Let's go into full screen mode. Let's inspect that element and see what is broken where. All right, inspect that. Go ahead. Oh, you know what? I know what I did. I did this exactly when I was preparing for this too. I'm not actually hovering over promo content. I'm actually hovering over promo, and then I'm affecting promo content. So we will take out that. So now on promo, hover, space, find the child that is promo content, and apply this to it. So now when I hover, I get, it jumps in, it's immediately in view on both of these, right? So you can actually have a hover state higher up in your selector and then affect something that's deeper down in it. Now you can't have something that's down below have a hover state that affects a parent because there's no parent selector in CSS, but anything that falls in the cascade underneath it, anything that flows in nesting like that, is going to allow for you to affect it. So now that we have a difference between our non-hover state and our hover state, that's going to allow for us to transition that. And we transition that on the element that takes it. So on promo content, we will have a transition of 0.5 seconds ease out. I love ease out. It's the best of the basic timing functions. So now I hover over that and it's smooth. It scrolls into view. So that's the basics, right? I can very easily manipulate this to come in. A couple things to think about on this. When you do a hover state that affects more than simple styles, that affects positioning, mobile browsers, at least I know mobile Safari and at some point mobile Android did this, that hover state becomes a click state. So if you don't want to have to worry about a user for this, it's sometimes best to disable this at your smaller breakpoints, right? So we don't actually want the hover state on mobile. We only want this hover state to be on desktop, maybe on tablet, but anything that's touchable. And there are some new logical constraints that are coming to CSS that will allow for you to know if a user is using a touchscreen device versus just doing media queries based on size. So in this case, I would want to disable it for any touchscreen device. Although that gets into issues with the Microsoft Surface and stuff like that, but that's a problem for down the road. So then we're going to come in, and I want to also affect the other elements inside this. So I can specify that my promo contents children, the H3 and the paragraph, I'm going to give them an opacity change. I'm going to have them fade in after the white box transitions in. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to say, for my promo content, direct child of anything. Granted, you could select these by the H3 or you could add classes to this. I'm just doing this for simplicity. Anything that falls directly under promo content is going to have this applied to it. I'm going to set an opacity of 0. So now, when these transition in, I only get that background pane. The elements still exist on the page. They still exist in space, but they are opacity 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fade them in on hover as well. So we're going to come in here and we're going to have our promo hover again, because that's what we're transitioning. And we're going to say, same thing, promo content as a direct descendant of anything. And then I'm going to say opacity 1. So that's going to go from 0 opacity to 1 opacity on hover. As you can see, it doesn't look like a whole lot of stuff, right? Because it is just popping in and out, but that's what the transitional statement is going to be for. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to add transition. We'll do this 0.5 seconds ease out just like the other one. When I save that in, now you can see it fades in as it comes in and out. So what happens if we want this to be a multi-step process? The background comes right to left. The promo content then fades in. We can use a delay in our CSS to allow for that. So in the shorthand of transition, which this is one of the few properties I use shorthand regularly on, I can come in and I can specify a value after my easing function that is my delay value. So if I've got a transition of 0.5 seconds on my promo content sliding in, I'm going to specify 0.4 seconds for when I want the opacity transition to start. So you can see as it comes in, it takes 0.4 seconds to start. I could make this more dramatic and I could have it fade in after the user's already seen the final state of the background. It's a little slow for my take. I like to give users information as quickly as I can, as gently as I can. So in this case, it's a little bit too slow to get the user the information. So there's a happy medium in there somewhere. It's all about how it feels, how your users respond to it, as well as giving them the information they're looking for without a lot of headache. Because if they've got a lot of headache, they're not going to want to use your site. These animations are meant to make life easier, not hide content. So in this case, we'll go ahead and maybe make it all a little quicker. We'll have this fade in 0.2 seconds, and we'll have this be 0.3. We'll go ahead and let the fade in happen a little slower. So after it finishes its move, it then fades in that content. So it's pretty handy. You could do this in a lot of different ways. You could have your transform come from top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right. You could even do left and right values to have kind of a diagonal sweep in. If you wanted the content to expand out, you could animate your max width and your max height to do that. Take it from a max width and max height of 0 to a max width and max height of whatever value is going to make the most sense there, 100%, something like that. There's a lot of different options you can do in that. You could also change the opacity value on that background as well. Take it from an RGBA value, that alpha layer. You could go from 0.5 to 0.1, 1, whatever is going to make the most sense for that interaction. So these are the very basic building blocks of how this ends up working. You have an element. It has two states. Oftentimes on hover, this is going to be applied. You have your hover state. It goes from hidden buttons in my new tech stack. So it has two states, oftentimes applied on hover. It's going to transition any value that is transitionable, usually numeric values, numeric including color values. And then you can specify the amount of time. Oh, I did also want to show, this is one of my favorite websites to use. Let's see, for these transitions. So if you want to use something a little bit fancier than ease in, ease out, here are what are called, Bezier cubic functions, right? They are the easing functions themselves that CSS and JavaScript can utilize. Some of these aren't great for CSS. In fact, some of them don't even let you use them in CSS. But this is called easings.net. And I did want to showcase ease in out back, which actually has a little elastic effect to it, which I quite enjoy. So you can click on any of these and you can actually copy this cubic Bezier function. So I'm going to grab this and we're going to go back into Firefox. And now instead of that ease out function on my movement, so on my promo content, I'm going to specify the cubic Bezier function that I just got. So cubic Bezier, these values, you can play with them, you can tweak them, you can make some really interesting and sometimes even jittery effects depending on what kind of mood you're looking to strike. And then when I hover, you can see, let's make that a little slower. You can see when I hover that it actually goes further. So from right to left, it goes further and then snaps back in and then starts. So it's a little bit more elastic. It's a little bit bouncier. It feels a little bit more has a little bit more personality than the standard one. So this gives you a whole host of things you can play with. It gives you a lot of different functions to play with. You can preview them. You can start playing with the values it provides. It's a very, very handy tool. Easings.net, I'll post a link in the description as well. And then I always highly recommend the MDN Mozilla Developer Network to you how you can utilize it in multiple ways. So you can actually see how they go in a lot of different functions here. So that's it for today. That's our tutorial for today, talking about transitions in CSS. Now, if you're looking for more content about modern development practices, about doing things the right way, I would highly recommend that you check out either of my websites, either codecontemporary.com, my business website that has a paid course, Practical CSS Grid, where you can learn all you need to know about grid to put into production in under 2 hours. It's on that website, codecontemporary.com. You can also go to brianlrobinson.com, where I've got a host of blog posts that are featuring CSS, JavaScript, some static site content, all very interesting. I really appreciate if you took a look. And then, as always, I would really appreciate a like, or I suppose a subscribe down below, and click that little alert button so you know when I go live in the future. Because who knows, I might be doing more and more of these going forward. And then we will see you next time. I also have some speaking engagements coming up. I'll be giving a workshop at KCDC, Kansas City Developer Conference. I'll be doing CSS Grid there as a workshop. And then I'm also talking at Revolution Conf in June. KCDC is in July. Revolution Conf in June is in Virginia Beach. There's apparently a luau, so I'd highly recommend, if you're up for traveling, that you go to either of the websites. I'll post links in the description, and go ahead and sign up for those, because they're going to be pretty awesome. Great networking opportunities, as well as, hey, you get to come see me in person live talking about things at those conferences. One's a half-day workshop and one's just a regular 60-minute talk. But with that, I'll let y'all get going, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.